Good evening, everyone. My name is Jen Hicks. I'm the Director of Communications and Outreach with Maine Woodland Owners. I'm pleased to be here with a nice group of folks talking that are part of this timber harvest series that Jack Chappen, who is a forester with the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, who is in charge of a timber harvest operation at Frye Mountain. He's giving his time and knowledge to this group, talking about a timber harvest process that has been ongoing since November. This is our third program. And this is I would say a post-harvest discussion, or the timber harvest is just about to be finished up. So Jack is here to talk to us about the latest, provided a terrific presentation with photos, what's happened, some of the typical change of plans, which a lot of timber harvests tend to do. We also have Andrew Smart, who is the Mid-Coast chapter leader. He was the brainstormer on this idea of a harvest series. He's our volunteer in the field and lives in Unity, and is the one who thinks of these great ideas for our programs. So he's the one you should be talking to if you have any questions about upcoming programs or ideas for upcoming programs. So I'll have Andrew's email and phone number in the chat. You probably have it because he's been communicating with you, but I want to make sure everybody feels connected to him. And just real quick, for those who are not members of Maine Woodland Owners, I always like to promote membership at Maine Woodland Owners. We're the only statewide organization that's focused on providing resources and expertise to Maine Woodland owners, the small ones, those with 1,000 acres or less. We definitely welcome those who have more than that, but the average size family woodlot is about that size. And we have a monthly newsletter as one of your benefits as a member. So, and these programs. So I'm hoping everybody's a member, and if not, consider joining us, and you can visit our website at mainewoodlandowners.org. So that's all I have to say. I'm by no means the expert in this room. I'm going to pass the mic over to Jack. And I believe that Jack is open to the, if anybody wants to jump in with questions, can do that on chat. But also, I always encourage just putting a hand up in the screen, have your video on, or use the indicator as one of the reactions under your video screen is a raise hand. And I'll look for that, and I'll direct Jack to that if he's not catching that you want to jump in. So that's all the housekeeping I've got as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Jack. Thank you so much for being our guide on this process.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me. Like Jen said, I'm Jack. I'm a forester with IFNW, and tonight we'll be talking about the timber harvest operations. We'll go over goals of an operation, the methods, systems, and equipment used in an operation, major concerns and impacts during active harvesting and how they can be mitigated, and the role a forester plays during an active harvest. So I'll start this presentation by stating first that everything I say tonight is within the context of operations and not necessarily silviculture or forest management in general. So in a nutshell, the goal of a forest operation is how you get a tree in the woods out to the side of a road in the form of a log so that it can be trucked to a mill with as little impact to the forest as possible. So there are several actions that have to take place for this to happen. There's the tree felling, there's the delimbing of the tree, there's the bucking of that limbless tree into logs, and then there's the extraction of the wood out to the road. And it doesn't necessarily have to happen in that order. So we'll first look at felling machines. There's of course the chainsaw, but if you're going to be contracting a professional logging crew, these days, you'll either see a feller buncher or a harvester. Now, I'll state right now, I'm going to call this a harvester for this presentation. I think in Maine and New England, it's generally referred to as a processor, but most online resources I've seen refer to it as a harvester. So I'll just be consistent with that in case anybody wants to do further research online. So a feller buncher is that middle image. It's kind of looks like an excavator. It's a tracked machine with a cab and a boom arm. What makes it special really is the cutting head at the end of the boom arm, which consists of a circular blade with cutting teeth, and the blade stays in place. It's the head that actually cuts in, and then the arms along the head close and grasp the tree. What's special about the head is that it is fixed to the boom arm in a way with hydraulics that makes it act sort of like your hand attached to your arm. So there's all sorts of articulation and strength with it, so that once it cuts the tree, it has it in its full control, just like a pencil in your hand. So the operator can pick the tree up and even drive around with the tree, and then finally place the tree down pretty much exactly where they want to put it. The harvester, on the other hand, and that's the picture of just the cutting head, it attaches to a boom arm just like the feller buncher, uses a bar and chain that's featured at the bottom there, that swings out and cuts the tree. But before that, the head grasps the tree with the arms and rollers. The rollers are those black wheels. And the bar and chain swings out and cuts the tree, sometimes a few times if the tree is large. But what's special about the harvester is that most of them feature what's called a dangle head. It's not a fixed head. So it just sort of dangles at the end of the boom, sort of like the claw on an arcade prize game. It can articulate vertical as pictured, or horizontal to sort of push the tree over in the direction that it kind of wants to go, and at which point it then processes the tree. So I've got two videos of a feller buncher here from Frye Mountain Compartment F from this winter. In the first video, I want you to observe the size of the tree and the control it has in felling and its ability to walk with the tree. All right, in this second video, I want you to look towards the top of the screen and observe the forest canopy and how the crown of the cut tree interacts with the tree crowns of the residual trees. So you'll see that the operator finds an opening and begins to put the tree down. And when the branches get sort of caught up in the other tree branches, they let the weight of the tree sort of do the work and let those limbs flex through those branches to reduce top damage to those residual trees. From there, there's limbing and bucking machines, and some machines can do both. Chainsaw, stroke boom delimber, which I won't cover, kind of becoming more rare. And then, of course, there's the harvester, which can do both. When it comes to limbing, there's a pull-through delimber. And when it comes to bucking, there's also a slasher. So the harvester can also delimb and buck those trees. It's designed to do that in the woods. And as it does that, it creates different product piles along the skid trail. These product piles can consist of saw logs, and they'll stack them in sorts of hardwood saw logs and softwood saw logs, and also pulpwood. Softwood pulp and hardwood pulp have to be their own separate piles because they go to different mills. In the case of this operation, there was also a pile for pallet logs because those pallet logs were going to go to a mill that was different from the other saw logs. The tops of the trees and the branches that get delimbed are often used in the trail to protect the soil and to prevent and try to prevent the machines from rutting the trails. The way the harvester works is that the rollers on the head move the tree back and forth through the head to delimb it with the arms. The arms are sharpened and act as blades to cut the branches off. The swinging bar and chain then will cut the limbless tree into various log lengths set by the operator according to product specs. And I've got a video here that will show the felling and processing using a harvester. So he cut 2 lengths of hardwood pulp and then put the brush in the trail where they're about to track. So thinking back to that Venn diagram I showed earlier, there was the pull-through delimber, which just limbs the tree, and then the slasher that just bucks the tree stems into log lengths. The pull-through and slasher have to be used at what's called the yard because they're not mobile. They can't drive around on their own for the most part, and they're commonly used together. This usually involves a semi-truck bed where at one end there's a crane with an operator, and then at the other end is the delimber, and then placed beside that is the slasher. And the slasher is that yellow metal frame right there, and it can feature either a circular saw or a bar and chain that will then cut the tree stems into lengths. This is not a video that I took, this is one I found online, and we'll see this process here. Right, so that was the pull through and slasher. Now, extraction machines, there's the cable skidder, grapple skidder, and a forwarder. The cable skidder and grapple skidder, for that matter, are, you can try to imagine as sort of like a glorified tractor, except instead of the front wheels turning to steer the machine like a car or truck, the actual machine articulates in the middle and can pivot, so it can go around sharper corners almost. The cable skidder has a winch with steel cable off the back of it. And what happens is trees are felled by a chainsaw and are just lying strewn about throughout the woods. And the main cable off that winch is taken out to a tree and it's wrapped around the budded end, which will cinch up and pull the tree. Along that main cable are what are called choker cables that slide freely along that main cable. Those are also taken out to other trees lying about and wrapped around the budded ends. And so once the winch is pulled in, all the trees that are attached to cables will come together up into a twitch and then skidded out because the tops of those twitches are skidding along the ground, hence a cable skidder. So this is a video that I have found online that will show that process. All right, so that's the cable skidder. Won't comment on whether that was good operating or not, but it clearly shows how that machine is used. Then there's the grapple skidder. It's much like the cable skidder, except for having a winch. It has a boom arm that has 2 metal arms that will grab a bunch that's made by a feller buncher. The feller buncher fells trees and stacks them up into a bunch, and then this machine comes in and grabs those bunches and skids them out. This is footage from Frye Mountain Compartment J from last winter. All right, and finally, there's a forwarder, which is this last one to the right. It kind of looks like a glorified log truck. It's shorter. It also kind of articulates in the middle, and it's got beefed up tires for protecting against rutting. It goes around following a harvester, and picks up the sorted log piles along a skid trail using the boom arm and claw that it has, and it just fills up its bunk with usually one product at a time. So it'll drive around pulling just pulpwood at first and then saw logs and such. Sometimes it can do a mixed load, but it's pretty uneventful. Here's from this operation at Compartment F this winter. So it just slowly drives out. Nothing too special. So now there are harvest systems and equipment that are used here. So there are 3 broad categories. There's tree length, whole tree, and cut to length. Tree length is like old-fashioned hand crew. The tree's felled and limbed in the woods by a chainsaw. The tree length is then skidded to the yard using a cable skidder. Trees bucked into logs at the yard by a chainsaw and then loaded onto a truck. Whole tree operation, trees felled in the woods by a feller buncher. Then those bunches, which consist of entire trees, limbs and all, are skidded to the yard via a grapple skidder, where it's limbed and bucked at the yard using the limber slasher, and then trucked out. What's special to note here is that you will end up with the treetops and branches on your yard, which will accumulate very quickly, and you have to figure out what to do with that. You can haul it back into the woods, but if you're within an economic trucking distance to a biomass facility, you can chip that into the back of basically a semi-truck and have that sent as biomass. And finally, there's cut to length, which is a bit newer. That consists of a harvester felling the trees, limbing them, and bucking them in the woods, leaving that slash there. Then the forwarder comes in and moves those logs to the yard where it's then trucked out. There can also be a hybrid system, which is really any combination or variation of these previously mentioned systems. Probably the most common setup is that a buncher fells trees and then followed in the woods by either a harvester or stroke boom delimbing and bucking the logs in the woods, and then those logs taken out to the yard using either a skidder or a forwarder. And it's very similar to a cut to length system, but it has the added benefit of a feller buncher. That benefit with the feller buncher is that you have the directional felling that I talked about earlier. So if you have a lot of already established regeneration along the edges of your trails, a feller buncher can put those trees down in the trail and try to avoid damaging as much of that regeneration as possible. Also, if you're working in a forest stand with pretty large trees, I find that probably a feller buncher can handle the size of those trees more easily than a harvester can. since it's using that much larger circular saw instead of just a bar and chain. So this brings us to Frye Mountain Compartment F and this past winter cutting season. So some background for those who weren't a part of the first webinar or tour. Frye Mountain Compartment F is about 400 acres of operable ground. It was advertised to be harvested using a whole tree system. The existing roads we had could only access winter ground, so we have to build 2 new roads to access summer ground. We had some initial road improvements done last fall, with the remainder already contracted for to finish this spring. And that is dependent upon some winter timber harvesting in order to make room for ditch work that we have planned. The logging contractor is Dirigo Timberlands, and the plan was to cut the right-of-ways for the 2 new roads, daylight the existing road. Daylighting is basically just widening the existing road so it can facilitate trucking, and then to cut specific areas of the woods. And that's the area that we walked around in the fall, yard 2 and some grass blocks. But there were challenges. Late December, Dirigo was having trouble finding operators and equipment for a whole tree timber harvest, and we're questioning whether they're going to be able to operate at all. So this would have jeopardized our already contracted road improvement project and also delay the entire timber harvest by a year, since we can't access summer ground right off the bat. It has to start in the winter. So we worked out an agreement that at the very least they were to come in and cut the right-of-ways and daylight the existing road using a hybrid system. This hybrid system was a buncher followed by a processor followed by a forwarder. And the buncher landed January 5th. And one of the challenges was using a hybrid system on a job that was planned for whole tree harvesting. That challenge is that we were going to have the tops winding up in the woods. In this case, if we're creating right-of-ways within the right-of-way, a whole tree operation would have had all those tops taken to the yard and wouldn't have wound up in the space which would become new road. The problem with having that brush in the space that would be a new road is that it will make building road later on more difficult. The excavator will have to pick it up, move it off to the side, bury it, and we can't bury it in the bed of the road because as it decomposes, the road will then sag and slump in places. Another challenge was this extremely mild winter. All the ground I had planned for this winter and the ground that we toured in the fall had to be scrapped. Even though I thought there were places that were well drained, places that were poorly drained, I thought I had a ton of options to move them around. But once I was working in January with almost no hat and gloves, I realized this was not going to work. I needed even better ground. So we had to quickly lay out, as the buncher was cutting the right-of-ways, a whole new yard for them to cut. And fortunately, that was a good decision because we were able to go pretty much the entire winter for them and were able to cut and get the necessary work that we needed to have done. And that just is a really good example that no harvest, no matter how well planned, has to have a backup plan. And in this case, I had to have a backup plan for my backup plan. And that's just the nature of timber harvesting. So there are several duties that a forester plays during an active timber harvest. There's advocating for trail conditions. Rutted trails don't regenerate very well. They can also lead to soil erosion and possible sedimentation into nearby water resources. So you have to take measures to prevent rutting and how to mitigate rutting if it is occurring. There's also advocating for the silviculture. Only the forester is going to know the prescription. The logger is just there to cut the trees. They don't know what the prescription is, and it doesn't really matter to them what it is. So the forester has to be able to dictate maybe some fine tuning operationally to the operator in order to meet some silvicultural goals. In the case of the cut this winter, I had to instruct to the operators to cut beech stems high. This reduces root suckering to reduce the amount of beech regeneration we are trying to get. Also dictating to them areas where they should be disturbing ground in order to expose more mineral soil to help other hardwood trees seed in. Also explaining to them where they should leave intact tops of trees in hopes that it'll deter deer browse on regenerating hardwoods. And also taking back or leaving unmerchantable logs back into the woods for coarse woody debris or special wildlife habitat elements. And then there's the residual forest stand as well. Are the operators damaging more trees than necessary? Are they cutting more trees than necessary? Loggers will rarely complain about having too much room to work in. So how can the forester retain as many trees as possible and still have equipment run efficiently? Of course, there's problem solving, and this is just a few problems on a daily basis that a forester will have to help figure out in conjunction with the contractor. There's adjusting harvest layout to better meet operator needs. In this case, it was adapting a whole tree harvest system for a hybrid system. So in this case, the forwarder needed ability to pile wood along the side of the road from the woods on warm days. So that meant creating a rerouting of a trail to come up parallel to the road to pile wood along the side of the road for the trucks to get. Otherwise, the forwarder was going to have to go into the road to pile wood, which is fine when it's really cold and there's snow cover. But after enough 50-degree weather days this winter, we lost the snowpack and the top frost on our road, and putting a forwarder in the road would have ruined our road. Also, you can see how far out and how high the boom arm of the forwarder has to go in order to reach the piles of wood off the edge of a skid trail. This is much different than a whole tree system, which would just be a bunch already in the trail that the grapple skidder would pull out. So taking some additional trailside trees had to be done in order to make enough room for the piece of machinery to effectively work. And you could let that up to the contractor to make the decision what trees to cut, but I doubt they would choose the tree that the forester has in mind to take out. So making sure a forester's on site to make those decisions, you'll get a better residual stand because of it. And also the forester will have a better understanding about what ground to operate and when. On these really warm days, because I'm out walking around the ground, the operators in the machinery driving around looking out through a window, I know what ground is better drained, what ground is better frozen. I can see the little trickles of water coming out and where there's areas to avoid if it's 50 degrees and sunny, as opposed to close to 0 and we're getting snow. And so moving them around, depending upon the weather, is another day-to-day task a forester plays during a active harvest. Sometimes this also means creating alternate trails to ones that aren't holding up because of weather conditions. And there's prioritizing what absolutely needs to get done and can it get done in the time allotted. And then of course there's highest and best use. Are the trees being cut, being processed to maximum value? And that brings us to merchandising. So there's a lot to this, and I'll try and make this as simple as possible. We'll first look at that image to the right. That is a best case scenario for a tree. That is in no ways a guarantee that every tree will have all those products in it. Most trees you cut, especially in Maine, would be entirely pulpwood. Maybe you'll have a grade log or two in it. Veneer is extremely rare. But in this case, we'll work from the top down. Veneer is the highest quality wood that you can cut. It also has to be at least 12 inches minimum diameter. In certain lengths, and they have to have almost no defects on the outside. This is because a veneer log will get peeled. The wood will be peeled off into sheets, sort of like if you imagine paper towel coming off of a tube of paper towels. That thin layer of perfect wood is going to be then applied as a veneer onto cheaper wood, and that's common with furniture making. And that will, if you have a veneer log, it will likely be in the lowest part of the tree. That's not a guarantee, but likely, because if you imagine where that tree was when it was 8 to 12 feet tall, all the branches that used to be there have died off and are now covered up with decades and decades of growth. So all that defect is concentrated way towards the center of that log. And ideally, you've got plenty of clear wood around that to use for a veneer. And then the value of a tree comes within the first 8 to 12 feet, if there is any log potential in a tree. Moving down in quality are grade logs. And they're called grade logs because they even have their own little hierarchy within their 1s through 3s, but for simplicity's sake, they have to be at least 8 inches minimum diameter, lengths 8 feet to 16 feet with certain allowable trim. And you want to check with what mill you're sending those logs to, because they might have a different trim acceptance compared to other mills. And these logs can have a limited amount of defects depending on what grade they get assigned, defects being knots, heartwood, sweep, etc. And then moving even further down is pulpwood. It has to be at least 5 inches minimum diameter, minimum of 12 feet in length, and as many defects as you can imagine. The tree can even be totally rotted. It doesn't really make much of a difference. So that kind of triangle there represents basically what those products pay, but also the volume that they'll comprise of a typical job in Maine. Most of the volume you pull out of the woods are going to be pulpwood, which pays less than grade logs, which will be, I think, what we've found at Frye Mountain so far. About 25% of the volume is in grade logs, and then a very small fraction is veneer, and that pays top dollar. What I didn't cover is the biomass. That's just the branches that gets chipped and is worth very, very little, to the point that you might not be within an economic trucking distance to make that economically viable. So merchandising continued. A common daily task of a forester is inspecting the pulp piles for product utilization. Different mills have different specs, and you want to make sure that high quality wood isn't accidentally ending up in a pile of a lower quality category. So this picture is of a pulp pile, and I blue spotted the trees that I thought could be grade 3 pallet logs instead of pulp. And this was just a conversation you have with the operator, whoever is doing the merchandising. In this case, they were finding that they had sticks of pulp where there could be an 8-foot piece of log in there, of pallet log, but once they cut off that 8 feet, then they've got 4 or 5 feet remaining of unmerchantable wood. And they were accustomed to landowners who would just like to see all the wood get pulled out and sold. For us, we don't mind having extra and stray pieces of wood left in the woods. That's coarse woody debris, it's soil nutrient recycling, it's all sorts of stuff. Plus, it actually pays more to pull the pallet out than to send it as pulp. With the case of that hollow log up in the top corner, I spotted that because that's best left for wildlife habitat than to go as pulp. It could be a log for grouse to drum on, or that hollow center could allow for a den site for small mammals. And then there's trail mitigation. So rutting will happen. What will you do? So a buncher can use the back of the head to knock down and smooth out mounds. Skidders and forwarders have blades to quote unquote back drag. This means they put the blade down and drive in reverse to smooth out the mounds and smooth out the trail. This can be hard to do if there are a lot of stumps. The blade could get caught in the stumps and potentially damage the machinery. But all machines can quote unquote set over and ride the tops of the mounds to level the ruts. Now, if you were part of the first tour, you will remember that we try and make our trails as narrow as possible, just a few feet wider than the machine itself. This means there might not always be room for them to fully set over and do that. So in that case, brush is essential, and placing brush perpendicular to a trail is best if you can do that. They refer to that as corduroying. This helps distribute the weight of the machine more evenly across the trail. It also acts to press down the mounds and kind of smooth things out with more trips over that brush. And it also better allows for water flow to flow across the trail and not down. So if you've got a rut, you've got water flowing in from the side into that rut, it will stay in that rut and it could flow down your trail, making more of your trail wet than would actually happen otherwise. So if you place the brush perpendicular, it might help channelize that water to go across the trail and off your trail as soon as possible. And these photos here are of the right-of-way. This is not a trail, so that's 40 feet wide that you're looking at. And that first image is from January. The last one is end of February. So it took that amount of time for the brush and the number of trips to smooth things out. And, that's the case for, rut mitigation, is that, when you're using brush, it will take a lot of time for things to get better. And oftentimes it will look worse before it looks better. And so if you've got issues like this happening midway or towards the end of a job, it might be best to just find an alternate trail, because you might not have enough time left in your cutting season to make that trail look better. So that's everything I prepared. Before I take questions, I want to show a few more photos. This is a typical yard that we do, a triangular yard, 120 feet road frontage, 90 feet deep. You can see on the right where they pile up the biomass. There's a few spots there where they can pile up round wood being saw logs or pulp. Otherwise, those are piled alongside the road, like here for a truck to truck right up to and load. This also shows the forwarder piling the wood from the woods instead of going into the road. And here are the sorted piles along a skid trail that a harvester makes and that a forwarder will pick up. So I'll take questions at this point.
Anybody can feel free to jump in. I have a quick question. While we're waiting for people's questions, Jack, any surprises in this process for you?
Surprises in this process.
In this part of expect the unexpected moment.
Yeah, I'd say the weather we had this winter was probably the most surprising. I don't find myself usually being an optimist, but I thought for sure if things would get cold and snowy. I mean, it is now, which is kind of nice if you're finishing up a job, but most of the winter felt like perpetual March. So that was surprising and was a consistent challenge. And, there were days where I shut the crews down, where they just didn't work at all. And that's not unusual, but we had to do it more than average. And they were very understanding of that, which was really nice. And we kind of also found ourselves in a weather pattern where the weekends were good and they were willing to work weekends, which was really nice. So we could take advantage of as much of the cold weather as we could when it was happening.
There is a question from John Maury. Will slash on the trail prevent rutting on heavy clay soil? And John, feel free to unmute, and if you want to expand on that question or follow up on Jack's response, please do.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend, if you're cutting in the winter time and we have a winter like this, just using brush regardless of whatever soil type you have, even if it's shallow to ledge. If it rains, there's not much room for that water to go anywhere. And you could even wind up with a sloppier mess on a soil type like that than you would with heavy clay soil. Heavy clay soil, it'll get sloppy if it gets wet, especially if it was tilled for agriculture. But it also works in a reverse fashion that it could dry out super well in the summertime and be really hard because it's clay. But yeah, brush is your friend. It's not always the most aesthetically pleasing looking thing, but it is better for the environment, and you are returning nutrients back to the soil as it decomposes. There have been studies that show that poultry harvesting and the removal of that brush out of the woods leads to soil nutrient degradation with time. Most of the nutrients in a tree, besides the leaves, are found in those fine twigs and branch tips.
Jack, do you know how many acres were cut and what was the total time frame that they did cut this winter?
Yeah, I haven't totaled up the acreage for the right-of-ways, but in terms of actual silvicultural prescribed cutting, it was about 40 acres, which is a little bit less than we were expecting for a normal cutting season, but they did start a little late. They started January 5th. Usually you can get going between the week of Christmas and New Year's and kind of get a jump on things. So they started January 5th and forwarding ended last Friday. And we're still getting the trip tickets in, so we don't know exactly how much volume has been cut yet.
Jack, maybe while they're thinking about questions, you could talk about Saturday and
Yep.
why we're rescheduling.
Good idea. Great.
Yeah, so I think we're gonna get snowed out on Saturday. Since trucking has finished, they're not plowing the road anymore. And with the snow that came today and what's coming Friday night into Saturday, we're just not gonna be able to get in. But we can definitely reschedule to a later date and time, probably sometime, I think, late summer. And we can that's recent enough that things will still look like a fresh harvest, but we'll kind of get a sense as to what like a single growing season can do as well in terms of green up and things like that.
So we'll keep, oh, here we go. From Eric Evans, wondering how the chestnuts there figured in the harvest and wildlife management plans.
Yeah, I haven't run into any chestnuts in compartment F, but there are chestnuts at Frye Mountain. Whenever we find a chestnut or any other rare tree species for that matter, we take a GPS point, we put it into our data system, so we know where it is. We try to avoid disturbing it. If we think we can safely release something like a chestnut from competing trees to give it more light and resources, we'll do that. Otherwise, that is 100% something we leave on the landscape and provide as a food source. And in some cases, the department has planted chestnuts on properties. Some do really well, some died out immediately, but maintaining mass producing tree species is one of the foundational components of the type of forestry that we do in the department. And that's because it provides an excellent food source for wildlife.
I'm going to, there's a couple things that I want folks to have before we finish up tonight. That's, Jack, you're open to having people ask questions directly online, on email?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
just remind me, you're John.
Yeah, john.chappen@maine.gov.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll put that in. And I'm Jen at MaineWoodlandOwners.org. And then we have Andrew at, who you all actually got an email from Andrew. So I'm going to leave that one out. But then I'm going to also put our link to the video that Jack provided to kick off this whole series. So it's a great way to, for those who weren't there, haven't seen that video, talks about the whole program, the history of Frye Mountain, the work that's have been done, and then what was being developed. So that video is really helpful to make sure you have the full picture of this program. And then next steps will be, we will be in touch with this group and put the word out on our newsletter, on our email, and our website when we have scheduled the next field event. Probably we'll do another web program just to touch base, and Jack can give a quick update. Maybe it's a quicker event. I do see another question. This one's from Alyssa. Oh, actually, Alyssa, I'm wondering, could you go ahead and unmute and share your question with the group?
Thanks, John. It's actually Jared. So my
Okay,
husband Jared is here too. He
sure.
was working with IFNW and with Jack, so he had something he wanted to share.
Yeah, just to follow up on the American chestnut conversation. In compartment J, we did have what we can only guess is actually a wild grown chestnut, about 6-inch diameter. It's not anywhere that any have been planted before, so we're actually not sure how it's still there and still doing as well as it is. But as Jack was saying, when we found it, we put a GPS marker on where it was, and we put up certain flagging, like plastic indicator flags, to make it clear that, hey, this is a special tree. And then when the contractors started working, we took them out there beforehand and showed them what we had and what we were going for, and made sure they were aware that it was there, knew what to look for, so that when they got to it, they could take special care around it. We did a 2-sided release just to give it a little bit more light, free up its canopy. Yeah, because the contractors are usually able and willing to make some special concessions like that when you have points of interest like that you want to take care of.
Yeah, thank you, Jared. To even take it even further, yeah, we do this for like any smooth bark beech that we find. If we find beech that's resistant or tolerant enough of beech bark disease and is producing beech nuts, we'll do the same thing. We'll we'll GPS it, flag it, make sure it doesn't get damaged by pointing it out to the operators.
And that could be the case for any special tree or feature in your woods, right? You as the owner of your property, you have the final say in what happens on your property. And that's something we try to impart in any of these discussions. Ultimately, the owner has the final say.
Yep, they are contractors. They are working for you, the landowner.
So did you have that kind of relationship with your contractor, with your logger? Jack, were you in constant contact with them and there was a back and forth conversation?
Oh yeah. Yeah. If first day when they arrive, you know, you're talking to maybe their forester or somebody that's leading their business. But once the operators arrive on site, names, cell phone numbers, email addresses, I share with them the maps that I've made of like the trail system, of the silvicultural prescription that's all mapped out. And then just communicate with them all the time, check in with them throughout the day, asking them how they feel things are going, challenges that they're facing, trying to find solutions for them. But yeah, just pointing out also a ribbon key. If you were out at the first field tour, you have seen ribbons and paint everywhere. Sometimes we usually paint to cut, but also we will paint X's. That means to not cut. We might even write little notes with the paint on trees for them to do. And so giving them a key that explains what all the different ribbon colors and combinations mean, what all the painted symbols mean, just trying to make things as clear as possible. And so very clear communication with the operators is essential.
Great. Okay, so everybody's got contact information. Please be in touch. We'll be in touch with everybody about the next time we come together. And in the meantime, feel free to ask any questions, or if you're having your own harvest experience, this would be a good opportunity to kind of share your experience when we meet up again. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And we look forward to seeing you when there's no snow on the ground. Although it's wonderful to have snow, I'm sure, for some of you. I think everybody will be happy to see summer come around when it does. So thanks, Jack, for your great narration of this. The videos were great, actually. That's something we don't get a lot of. So I'm glad we have this recorded and people can revisit that. This video will actually be posted on our website, and I'll make that link available to this group and on our newsletter as well.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for having me again.
All right. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks for joining us.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.